get started. And we're just doing a little bit of troubleshooting on the other sessions, but I think this one is good to go. I don't have any emergencies coming in. So I think it's also because people struggle with Zoom.
Yeah.
But we're here now. So I just want to just start by first off thanking both of you for being here. Obviously, it's Black Girl Magic all together, and I'm enjoying all of this. From meeting both of you, so I met both of you separately, and just the energy that was presented and exchanged, I just knew that this would be a great opportunity for both of you to connect, for us to all have this conversation as a community, and to share it with folks. So with that said, I want to start by introducing both of our speakers. So our first speaker with us today is Jardin Dogan. I'm so bad at pronouncing your name, and I'm so sorry. Okay. I'm getting better at it though. And Jardin is a MP, oh gosh, I'm getting your titles wrong. MPHED, is that right? Hold on, I think that's right.
Well, I have a master's in education and clinical mental health counseling.
I have my letters backwards, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm trying to get all this together. Okay, so, and not only that, so she's got her master's in education and her ED.S, and she's the owner of Jardin Dogan. So she specializes in oftentimes clinical therapy, and she also has experience running Black folks therapy on Instagram. And what that is she offers services to folks who are educational information to folks who are learning about different forms of racial trauma, any kind of mental health and wellness type challenges. And so having her here today has been amazing, and I'm very glad that she's here with us today. And I also have Elyse, and I'm so sorry, guys, because my whole thing just collapsed. So I just want to make sure I open and get this right. Okay, great. Apologies here. So I would like to start this again. So I want to welcome Elyse Galloway, and she has a blend of health, communication, and unapologetically Black. She is studying community health and anthropology at Tufts University, and has subsequently received her master's in public health from the Yale School of Public Health. And so her focus here is bridging the gap between health sciences and public awareness, so making sure that we understand that. And then her passions are minimizing the divide that led to health communications, where folks are not necessarily understanding what's going on in our healthcare system, what's going on with our bodies. She's contributed to diverse initiatives, from President Obama's Precision Medicine Initiative to Sesame Street's efforts to address traumatic experience endured by children. So I want everybody to thank you and welcome Elyse as well. And I want to just kind of start and dig in here with you folks, because public health has been a conversation that is trendy in many instances, right? It's very trendy for folks to be a part of wanting to heal and using all those buzzwords that make it seem like, oh, it's super easy. But I think when you start the work, it's not as easy as it may seem. So that said, I want to start by asking Jardin kind of to tell us a little bit about your experience and how you began to embark on the path of public health and wellness, and how you began your experience in this field as well.
Mm-hmm. So I'm currently a PhD candidate, so got like a year left in counseling psychology. So I do a lot of work and therapy with Black populations, specifically related to racial trauma, which you talked about, but also mental health and health disparities and how they all kind of combine and conflate and manifest. And so I started with wellness and health because I recognized just how we're not living our full lives. And I remember asking my advisor, can Black people be happy? And she was like, yeah, of course. And I was like, okay, that's and so I think that really kind of pushed me to go to therapy for the first time. And so that experience was life-changing, but it was also super difficult just because I encountered all the barriers that we face as far as getting therapy, but also just talking about our health in general, right? And so when I was talking to my family about going to therapy, there was a lot of stigma of like, well, what's wrong with you? And, you look fine, so why you need therapy? Like, you're not crazy. And so that really just pushed me to realize that, wow, there's so much stigma and there's so much pushback when you talk about health, right? Even like, when you may exercise and things like that, sometimes you hear certain stigmas and norms around that. And so just the barriers that I encountered really made me want to say, I need to go into this field and I want to make a difference. So that's why I'm here.
We're glad to have you. And so, Elyse, kind of the same question. Know that you focus from a very science-driven perspective, and understanding how that contributes to our overall wellness. So what started you on that path, and how did you kind of decide this is the field that you wanted to be in?
Definitely. So I have been a science nerd from the very beginning. Like, I was that kid in 6th grade asking for extra frogs to take home to dissect on my own time so I could figure out, like, what's this system and how does that connect to that? So I've always been a science person, always very focused on human health. When I was in college, I wanted to be pre-med, like a lot of people, but realized a lot of my skills and how I view the world was more analytical. It was more population focused. It was more on how do we prevent something from happening? How do we prevent a person from having a heart attack? How do we make sure that they have a healthy life to, like, sustain activities and their families and love and everything like that? And so dove into the world of public health, which has been super fun. And I think when individuals dive into public health and wellness, at first it's very one-dimensional. It depends on where you're getting it from, but it can be very one-dimensional. And so over time, I've grown to challenge the frameworks of wellness, challenge who informed them, what their values were, what their objectives were. And I've come to appreciate the fact that wellness has to be culturally constructed, because every population has different values, have different histories and backgrounds, experience the world differently. And so that's where I've kind of come into the health disparities, health equity conversation. Let's understand the greater context in which Black individuals live and experience the world and experience health and wellness as well, and construct a culture that is informed by their lived experience, that they can engage with and thrive. So that's kind of been my trajectory from early science nerd to health equity and health disparities in wellness.
Wow, I'm glad that you say that, because I think what we realize now, right? It's like Black people, our communities, Black and brown communities, right? We were late to mental health and wellness, right? We were kind of like, like we've always seen shows where white people go and sit in front of a shrink and they talk about their problems. But again, back to your point, Jordan, go pray about that, baby. Like, no, ain't nothing wrong with you. You just need to eat something. You need some sleep, right? There's never been a moment where where somebody ahead of us has said, you know what, maybe we need to bring somebody in and talk to you, right? And listen to what's going on so we can figure out what the root cause of that is. And a lot of that is structured culturally. And so that's why thinking about Black culture and how now we have the space to talk about mental health, to heal ourselves, where do you think that's coming from now? And again, because it is a trend, and I don't think it should stay a trend, I hope it doesn't, but to avoid it becoming just a trend, how do we create space for this to continue to be part of our norm?
Mm-hmm. So I really love that question, because I'm doing research right now looking at the double pandemic. And so what I mean by that is not only are we dealing with COVID-19, but we're dealing with anti-Black racism, right? And so I think one reason why this has kind of manifested and kind of hit the fan, colloquially speaking, is because we have had to really sit down and be still and sit with our emotions. We're so used to, on the go, on the fly, constantly moving and shaking, that we don't really take time to rest and sit still and kind of process, how am I feeling? What's going on for me? What emotions am I experiencing? How does my body feel? And so COVID-19 has really made us say, okay, I guess I'm going to sit here and sit with myself, right? And so I think that I hope this has started conversations, and we can keep the conversations happening and the momentum going, so that this is not just a one-time conversation, right? This is a conversation that we can have over time consistently, where we're talking about what impact has this had, because the pandemic is not going away. I know we want to go back to normal, but this is our new normal. And so I think that the conversations continue to be had, but also I'll just add that, you know, I'm seeing a lot more awareness pages pop up on social media, you know, the conversations being had, especially, I don't know, in my generation, our generation, the millennials, where we're talking about how, you know, this pandemic has really messed stuff up. Okay. I had trips planned I can't go to anymore, you know, like, you know, from a first world perspective, okay, a lot of changes have happened, but also I think we're realizing it's okay to say, you know, I'm not doing the best and I need help. And so I think that's where we're going. And I hope that just the conversations can continue, because I think that as Black people, we are the cultural carriers in our country. And so I think that we can create a movement to where we say, you know, therapy is cool. Like, we can go to therapy and not be seen as and perceived as crazy. And, you know, people will kind of follow our train. So I put all that to say that I think we have power in starting this movement towards mental health and mental health awareness.
I would agree. And I'm sorry to interject, but so much of that was so resonant with my own thoughts and my experiences. I think there definitely has been a resurgence or a public outcry in a positive way of what people are feeling, what people are thinking, being able to advocate and empower people in terms of mental health. We are in this pandemic and in this burgeoning civil rights movement, sitting still for the first time in a really long time. And we are having to grapple with and confront the things that we push away because of routine, because of fun trips, because of distractions. And so I think it has kind of slapped people in the face. It's like, let's reprioritize our lives and make sure that we're taking care of ourselves on a very elemental, fundamental level. So definitely see that boom in social media. But also, this was like a fun little anecdote I was thinking about the other day. In season 3 of Insecure, Molly went to therapy for the first time, right? And as problematic as that show is in terms of other public health topics, AKA sexual health, the emergence of a Black woman who is perceived as strong, accomplished, has her stuff together, in air quotes, right? Going to a therapist, seeing her experience, seeing their relationship unfold, and with a Black therapist as well, was earth-shattering. Because just like you said, Jordan, like, we see a white woman laid out on a couch talking about her struggles as a housewife, not minimizing any of that, but like, we see that depiction from the 50s all the way to now, right? When do we see a Black woman in therapy and having a healthy relationship with her therapist that also looks like her? My challenge, though, for Insecure, what about Dro? What about Lawrence? They should also go to therapy, because I think there's definitely not, I mean, they got issues, but like, that there is an opportunity there to look at masculinity, mental health, and emotional health, and place that in the context of therapy as well. So, I mean, lots of work to be done, but like, really interesting stuff. Like, it's happening in social media, which is great. I think more opportunities, visual representations of it need to happen as well.
I kind of want to stay on this point about masculinity and also what that looks like in therapy, right? And just to give like a personal caveat here, I think Jordan, I think I told you, or and maybe Elyse, I told you this as well previously, but I don't have any friends that don't have a therapist. I don't. Like, my close circle of friends, they all have therapists, because at the end of the day, it's about realizing it's not as scary. It's not this big, bad, ugly wolf. It's this thing of, I want to be my best self, and I can't be my best self if up here is not the best it can be, right? Mm-hmm. However, on the other side of that, when it comes to male relationships, what I've been experiencing, what I've witnessed, and what's been told to me is that breaking down that wall sometimes is very difficult. And I mean, maybe we're not the authorities to speak on it and holistically from a male perspective, but as doing your clinical work and as you've worked with male clients, what are some of their challenges in order to kind of get in the door and to speak with you and to work with you on the things that, make them most vulnerable?
I'm really glad that you also touched on this point, because I think that some of my most challenging, but my most worthwhile, like amazing clientele have been Black men. Okay. One, because sometimes my clients are older than me. And so, from my perspective, it's like, oh my God, you're like a father figure or an uncle. And I'm trying to convince you to come see me for therapy and to talk about your issues. So there's this generational piece too, right? And I think that I see that manifest when we're talking about John Henryism. Right. So constantly overworking yourself, constantly going hard to prove that, you're self-sufficient, that, you don't have any issues, that you're not vulnerable to larger societal stressors, racial stressors. And so they come in with this really strong shield of like, I'm good, right? Like, I don't need help. Meanwhile, their their physical health is deteriorating, their relationships are struggling, maybe they've had a lot of grief and loss from their parents passing away. And so it's like, there's so many layers that we have to get to. And there's so many cultural norms that say, you need to be self-sufficient. Like you can't be lazy. You can't ask for help. You also can't show emotions. And so that's another piece that I see is like this gender, we call it gender role conflict, where, there's these white masculinity norms that say, you need to be competitive and you need to be tough and, you need to, get to the highest ladder in society as far as power and money. But then you've got these Black cultural norms that say, no, you need relationships. You need to rely on your emotions. You need to, really be able to sit with the fact that you may not be this top tier person because you have these roles where you've got to be in relationship with people. So you can't always be the most powerful. And so they're it's interesting because I can literally see their brain like trying to put it together as a puzzle. And, sometimes that can cause a lot of conflict, especially when we're talking about relationships and showing emotions, because it's like, well, in order for me to be powerful, I can't be vulnerable. I can't show you, I can't cry. I can't tell you that hurt me. But then it's also like, but I want this relationship with my wife, or I want to be closer to my kids. And so there's this conflict that really happens, and it's this tension that they're trying to navigate. Because, in our culture, if they are more, emotionally expressive, sometimes they get comments of like, you're weak, you're a punk, don't, why you crying, right? And so it's this conflict that we really have to figure out what we want. We really have to get on the same page, because they're trying to figure it out and trying to figure out what works for them in their relationships. But society is saying, no, you can't, if you deal with racism, if you deal with a cop encounter, a police encounter, you can't go home and cry. You got to be tough. So that's what I see when I sit across from my Black male clients. But when they do come to a place where they have figured out what works for them, it's amazing to see, because it's like this full completeness that comes over them. They walk with this confidence, and they're just like, I am who I am, and you're gonna either accept it or you're not. So long-winded question or answer, but I hope that helped.
No, that's great. And Elyse, I definitely want you to chime in as well, as coming from how you experience that as well from the male perspective. How do they receive the services that you offer?
Well, the services I offer are really women-focused, and so they don't come to my workshops. But I think what's interesting, right now I'm reading a book, Hood Feminism, and there is a chapter called It's Raining Patriarchy. And I think it touches on so many of the points that you just touched upon in terms of men, Black men, having to grapple with white dominant patriarchy, as well as what they are indoctrinated to believe as male, like Black manhood, and the tension that causes in terms of their relationships. And it's real. I mean, like it's kind of, as crazy as it is, it's hard to put into words, but it's like, imagine having to confront, and you guys don't have to imagine this because you're Black women, we face this in different ways, but having to confront patriarchy and then Black manhood and just be like, where's the resolve? Where do I exist? You know, and what if I don't measure up? I can't say anything because then I'll be frowned upon in my own community, and I already am frowned upon in the white dominant culture. And so where do I sit? So I think it's really important for Black men, I think, to become more expressive about what they're facing and what they continue to face. And something that I've been really enjoying, I have a side project right now called the Humanization Project, which is basically allowing and inviting Black individuals to share an experience of what their Black experience is in America. And the experiences that Black men have put into this, whether it is a acute traumatic incident like police brutality, although we all know that that's not acute, right? It's systemic, but let's say it's acute for the individual, or a microaggression. And being able to grapple with that emotion and have them articulate that has been such a beautiful experience and such a blessing on my part to be able to understand what people are going through. And so I think more projects like that, Lawrence going to therapy on insecure, you know, having men's groups, and I know that they're coming out, but having more men's groups be public in regards to what's going on, I think would be a field day for me. I'd be like the happiest girl in the world. Because if our Black men are able to thrive in terms of their mental health, nothing can stop us. You know, like if we all can thrive, nothing's gonna stop us, so.
Absolutely.
I
And
do want to add, oh, I'm sorry. I want to add just a piece, if that's okay, that, you know, we kind of touched on, but also stereotypes and how they come up into therapy, you know, and how we kind of live them out and kind of make them become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And when I say stereotypes, I mean like older ones as far as like being a coon, Uncle Tom, Mandingo, and like how they manifest now in our daily lives, right? Where we're maybe, you know, engaging in a lot of sexual risk behaviors, where we're, you know, talking about a lot of violence in communities. And so also kind of breaking down those stereotypes and recognizing that we are not, we're multidimensional. And so you don't have to necessarily align with a rapper or an athlete or an entertainer. You know, you can be a businessman, or you can be a lawyer, or you can be a, I don't know, you can be whatever you want to be. You can be all that you want to be. And so that's also what our therapy focuses on, is like making sure that you see how multifaceted you are and how many talents that you can foster, rather than being siloed to these stereotypes that society has placed you in. Because a lot of my male clients will come in and say, you know, during college, people thought I was an athlete and I just want to be an engineer. And so that kind of shaped their experiences and them seeing their worthiness and them being able to kind of hone in on their crafts and their skills. And so also breaking down a lot of the stereotypes that we experience from broader society that, quite frankly, in my personal opinion, are strongly inaccurate. So
I'm sure we all agree, definitely. We are not a monolith. I mean, just being part of the work that I'm doing with Black Independence Project, my co-founder, like we are all beautifully defined and painted in various shades. So I love that. I did want to go back to one point, because talking back again to that health piece, how your mental health starts to take a toll on your physical health. And we are in the middle of a double pandemic. I remember Black Independence Project just was founded off of that, right? Where I was just so defeated mentally, it was starting to show physically. And I was like, listen, I have to do something. Like, we have to do something, because I can't even eat. I haven't eaten in 4 days. I want to eat, you know? So you just start to think about those things. So as we consider how we can take care of our bodies and our mental, what are some ways that you kind of advise folks to care for their physical? Because when you're really down in the dumps, you don't want to eat. You don't want to do anything. You really want to sit and binge watch Netflix, but you got to fuel the machine. You got to fuel the engine. So what are your tips around that?
I'll let you take it first, Rudy.
okay. So I often like to tell my clients that kind of like what you said, there is a mind-body connection. And so sometimes it's really hard, especially when you're depressed or when you're just down and out, blue, whatever you want to, you know, however you want to call it. it's really hard to, like you said, get up and move. And so we talk about doing something called behavior activation, which is doing little small steps, right? So sometimes if you're depressed and you're sitting on the couch watching Netflix, to go to your kitchen and create a meal feels like you are carrying 400 pounds, right? And you're just like, I don't want to do that. But it could be, in therapy, we could talk about how about you get up and maybe you have an apple and you reach for that. And it may seem super small, but over time, as we know, with practice, things can build up. And so that's one way that we kind of help our client, or I help my clients kind of get moving and shaking, especially when they're down in the dumps. But I also talk about how, and this may be kind of triggering for some folks, but I've really talked to my clients about how when we don't take care of ourselves physically, we are in essence talking about harming ourselves, essentially, killing ourselves, right? So when we eat poorly, when we don't rest, when we, engage in things that really don't fulfill us, it's like a slow death in a way. And so I've had clients sit across from me who, have gone through weight loss surgery and are regaining a lot of weight back and, just dealing with a lot of physical health issues. And so we talk about the importance of what you eat really fuels your mental health. So if you're depressed, and let's say, for example, if I'm depressed and I'm eating a whole bag of Oreos, that's not going to help me feel better. It's going to make me feel worse. And so the things that we eat also contribute to our gut microbiome in our body. And that has been shown to really influence how we feel, and also our mental health, our energy levels, our ability to sustain, our ability to think critically and clearly, our ability to feel our emotions and kind of sit with them. So they're all connected. And so when my clients hear that, they're like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. But also, I think Elyse kind of touched on this. We don't have those conversations because the health literacy in our communities isn't fostered. So folks really don't recognize the fact that what you eat has a strong impact on how you feel.
Yeah, and I think, you touched on such a beautiful concept. And in my head, I was like, what would a thesis title of that be? I was like, oh gosh, and it's almost passive destruction. It's passive destruction. And if you look at any other aspect of our lives, right? If you look at your job, if you look at, let's say, a relationship, a partner that you have or something like that, you are active in building. You are active when you're at work, right? Most of the time. You're engaged. You are making smart moves and decisions. And so in those moments where you are down, blue, depressed, not feeling your best, you need to think of what are some action steps that I can take that'll help me in the long term and help build me in the long term, right? So I think it's super easy to eat a whole sleeve of Oreos. It'll make me feel good for like 5 minutes. And then an hour later, I'll be like puking my guts out, I'll feel heavy. I'll feel weighed down. I'll feel guilty. So I think it's a shift in mindset. It's like, what's the short term? Is this short term going to serve me long term? Or is it just going to serve me now? And I think this question goes into the larger concept of self-care, right? Self-care is an opportunity for our mental, emotional, and physical selves to be replenished, right? And by doing that, you are developing resilience, right? So you are taking actions to meet your mental, emotional, and physical wellness. And there's a whole bunch of other wellness pillars as well, but we'll just bucket out into 3 for right now. You're taking action steps. You're engaged in that decision making. Being engaged in that decision making makes you feel good because you're regaining control over a situation. It's a feedback loop. So the more that you activate, the more you engage, the more decisions that you make that not only serve you in the short term, but also serve you in the long term, you can dig yourself out, right? You have the power to dig yourself out. And sometimes it takes a little kick in the butt from a family member or a friend, or writing affirmations on your fridge. I have affirmations on my fridge over there from a sermon that I love. I'm like, when I'm feeling discouraged, remember that God gives me confidence. Just little things like that. Finding practices that'll kick you in the butt to make that activation and that engagement quicker every single time.
Absolutely.
I love that piece. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Cutting you off. I'm sorry, but this is just too good. I love that piece, Elyse, that you talked about, because that's something that I try to talk about with my clients and just with people I know, is that there's a difference between numbing and self-care. And we engage a lot with numbing, right? So sex, food, shopping, looking good, like whatever makes you feel good in the moment, but does it sustain you, right? Is it going to give you the gas to keep going on your journey, or are you going to choo-choo, right? Are you going to be on the side of the road? And so I really love that piece. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, for sure.
Absolutely. No, I mean, you guys can chime in anytime. I'm just here to facilitate. But one thing I did kind of want to touch on, because Elyse, I know that your work in terms of working with children and just making sure that our children also, you've worked with like Sesame Street, just kind of having that lens. I just kind of want to ask you some questions around thinking about wellness with our youth.
Yeah.
What are we missing? What are we getting wrong right now? Because I mean, Jordan, I feel like I've talked to you about this. I think about legacy so much, and I just know like everything that I do from now on, I want it to be instrumental to making sure that my children and my children's children are able to be their best selves in this world. So
Right.
what are we doing wrong now with our generation, and how can we start to like do things to actively turn that around?
So in terms of framing, right, because I'm in communications, right? So I'm like, words matter, and everything like that. It's not so much what we're doing wrong. I think it's acknowledging where we're at and acknowledging what is impacting and influencing the ecosystem in which our youth are growing up in, and adjusting that in order to sustain positive change, right? And so if you look at the backdrop of the Black lived experience in the United States, it is characterized historically and presently with violence and trauma. Does that define us? No. Is it characterizing? It most definitely, historically and in present day. And that definitely has an impact on the emotional and mental wellness of individuals growing up and adults, right? So I think when we think of trauma and violence, it's very easy to go, it's affecting me, it's affecting my older brother, it's affecting my dad and stuff like that. But I think we forget how it's affecting individuals who are developing and growing in very fundamental ways. And so we have to look at individuals and children, especially when it comes to trauma, and think about how they're processing and dealing with it, because they might not have the same, and they do not have the same signs and symptoms of depression, of conflict, or anything like that. They might come out in different ways, whether it's acting out in school or like aggression towards a sibling and things like that. So I think it's understanding the ways in which young children, especially young Black children, feel trauma, experience trauma, process trauma, and grow up in an environment where, one, we face constant racism. I remember as a third grader, someone coming up to me being like, I don't want to be friends with you because you're Black, right? And I'm sure a lot of people have that experience, right? But that was in third grade, right? So we face constant racism, institutional, structural, individual, but we also face these acute situations of police brutality, divisive language in terms of political rhetoric, COVID, and so I'm so interested to see the studies that come out of this time period. And I really pray and hope that there are studies right now that are being conducted that really analyze and track not only the Black lived experience for children, but what their trajectory is long-term. But I don't just hope that there are those studies. I hope that individuals are able to receive care and are able to receive attention, because 1 in 3 Black individuals in the United States get mental health care. Only 1 in 3. That's a third, right? And there are a host of barriers. There are internal barriers that we mentioned, stigma, also mistrust of the healthcare system, but external barriers in terms of social determinants of health, where you're located, if you have access, insurance or underinsurance, the culturally competent providers that look like you, and that's only magnified among youth, right? Like finding a child psychologist that's Black, that's close in your area, that's probably pretty difficult to find, and so, again, super long-winded. I mean, you could have us talking on here for hours, my gosh, but I think it's critically important to think about how all of these factors not only affect us, but affect the generations that are coming ahead of us and are behind us and growing in this time as well.
I'll also add that, I love that, Elyse. I'll also add that something that I have learned, and I'm studying this, right, is that trauma, because when we're talking about racial trauma, we also experience vicarious trauma, right? And trauma is pretty much a disorder in your body. And so what I personally believe, and I think I have some research to back me up, is that the Black children that, are growing up now are pretty much manifesting the trauma that our ancestors have experienced. And so I think that's why we see high rates of suicide, or suicide by in younger, Black kids, right? So Black males, their suicide rates, I think, in middle to high school are astronomically like growing. And I think that's because, our culture is changing. There's a lot of different things going on, but also I think that they're physically manifesting all of the things that our ancestors have kind of suppressed and, we've been told not to talk about, and just to kind of keep pushing and going forward. But, because we are talking more about mental health, I personally think that that's also why we're seeing more suicide, why we're also seeing more children dealing with a lot of behavioral issues. It's because we're talking about it, right? And so whenever you talk about things that you have buried so deeply, and now we want to dig it up, it's like, oh snap, now we're seeing all this stuff kind of come to fruition and kind of show up, and we're just shocked. But I think that this was bound to happen in a way, just because now we're talking about things that we wanted to hide and not discuss. So I definitely say that trauma will come to the surface sooner or later, and so I think that's what we're seeing right now with our younger folks.
Yes, absolutely. And I just wanted to add one other thing to that too, because I think about the start of this conversation, how we talk about getting the help, right? And who needs to seek out help, and how do we do that? And what does that look like? And I mean, we all know, right? It starts with your inner child. We always got to go back to the inner child. And so I wonder, and this is, if we just do the right things from the start with our children, with our youth, if we teach them from the start how to cry, how to talk about things that upset them, how to express different types of emotions in a non-destructive way, in a constructive way, right? If we do that, then I wonder, have we completely changed the culture of healing? Do we get a jump start now? Even if we don't go to therapy and we don't talk about our emotions, with strangers, but in the home, if we just give them enough space and make that a priority for them, is that enough, right? So all of these things, these are all questions, and I know that we're not going to get to the bottom of it today, but I guess the important thing that I want to leave folks with, and I want to open the floor, so folks, if you have questions, please drop them into the chat, is where do we start, right? Is just pick a place and start, essentially. And for all of us, it's going to look different. For some of us, it's starting in therapy, because that's the only place that I have enough space to talk about me. For some of us, it's doing the work in our journals and practicing meditation and eating right and practicing a more holistic lifestyle. So if you guys want to, offer up any closing notes, then I just like you to share with the audience where they can get in touch with you, how to reach out to you, and anything else that you want to get on their radar. I'd like to give you the floor.
Yeah, well, I mean, just answering that question, I think you touched on something very beautifully and subtly, but everyone's journey in wellness is individual, right? We all come with different backgrounds, different skills and competencies. I know we joked about like being technologically skilled and stuff like that, but some people maybe need an external person to help grapple through things, or potentially a parent might not have the capacity to be that person for their child, but I think it's acknowledging that and trying to outsource and find resources. So I think just in terms of my closing, everyone's wellness journey, especially when it comes to mental health, is individual. And I think it's appreciating that, acknowledging what you need, what you have, and then assessing the next steps, right? There are so many people ahead of, or like that have gone before us, but we're in like 2020 now, like who knows, BC, I don't know how many BC years there were or anything like that, but nothing is so new that we don't know how to grapple with it. It just takes a conversation, and it takes connection, education, and awareness to figure out the best path forward. So that's my little thing, you know. But you can reach me at, I was doing like the at symbol, but I'm not that hip. Sorry. At Elyse the Beast 27. That's my Instagram. ELYSE the Beast 27. It's a college nickname. Don't ask why. As well as thisiswell.co on Instagram as well for This Is Well Collective. I'll give it to my other esteemed panelists.
Thanks, Elyse. Yeah, that question is one that we really have to keep processing. So I'm getting into the work of, we're looking at Black families and working with Black couples and families, because I do believe they are the cornerstone of our community, right? We can't have anything Black without Black couples and Black families, so period. But I will say that that's also, in addition to what Elyse said, that's also where we can really heal ourselves, right? A lot of the things that we experience are learned within the family. Our socialization as Black people is learned within the family, right? So did your family have conversations about your Blackness with you, or did they just kind of send you in the world and then you had to figure out from someone else telling you that you're Black, right? Also talking about like affirmations. Does your family affirm you as a Black person and as a person with different identities, right? Also kind of touching on intersectionality. But I do think that we need to start with the family. I do think that we need to start with children very young, right? Children starting at age 3 know about race. But we don't have those conversations because we're scared about, losing their innocence and things. But I do think we need to start with the Black family. I think the conversations need to be had with parents, with grandparents, if you're living multi-generationally in a household. But yeah, I think it all starts with the family, to be honest. Like, I didn't learn about health and wellness, I learned about it from my family, right? I saw it modeled for me. My dad was a tennis player, so I saw that. My mom was a track star, so I saw that. And that's where I learned about my health and wellness. So I do think the conversations need to be had in the home, because I think that informs how we go out in the world and how we see the world and move through the world and understand the world. So yeah, definitely just appreciate this conversation. I hope that this kind of sparked some thoughts. I hope some lights are going off in folks' head. But like I said, my name is Jardin Dogan. You can reach me at Black Folk Therapy, so BLKFOLX Therapy on IG. And I just try to provide information and really just promote therapy and break down some of the barriers to therapy and mental health among Black people. So that's where you can reach me. You can also reach me, let's say you want to work together and collab. You can visit my website, jardindogan.com. And so, yeah. Oh, I think we have a question. Oh, thank you, Markeisha, for that.
Yeah, so I dropped all the social media handles and the websites into the chat. And then one question we have here is, if you live in a trauma-filled environment / community, you don't realize that it's trauma. You think what's happening around you is just normal. How would you guys go about explaining to a kid or a teenager that their environment is not normal and that they should talk to someone? Oh my gosh, such a great question. Thank you for that question.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, DJ. Elyse, do you want to take it first, or you want me to take it? Me? You want me to take it first?
Okay.
Thanks, DJ, for this question. I would say that when I'm working with children, sometimes we go back to the basics of, well, how are you feeling? Is this experience making you feel positively, right? So are you experiencing positive emotions, or does this make you not feel that great? And this is like young, I'm talking about elementary and middle school, and they're able to kind of recognize like, yeah, this doesn't make me feel good. Like seeing someone that I love, get shot in front of my home, that produced a lot of fear in me, or, that didn't make me feel that well. And so then we kind of break down the conversation of, okay, what emotions are coming up for you? How are you experiencing this? What conversations are you having? And I think especially working with children, we also have to be aware that their parents are involved, right? And so they might leave my therapy room and go home, and their parents are like, I don't listen to that therapist, like this is just normal, right? And so when we talk about child abuse, when we talk about emotional abuse, physical abuse, it's really giving them the language to express their emotions. And so sometimes they're able to connect, okay, well, this made me feel bad, so maybe this isn't the best for me, right? Or maybe I have this emotion that I need to communicate with adults around me. But I think that I struggle with working with kids. I'm just going to be honest, because their parents are involved. And so, like I said, they'll leave the room and we've done great work. And then their parents are like, yeah, you can't be talking about that with them. And quite frankly, I can't. Legally and ethically, I can't. And so I think it's really important that older folks who are in their lives, so like getting a mentor, getting an advisor, getting older folks who can kind of have those conversations outside of therapy is also super important. And just getting them to recognize that this doesn't make you feel good. So maybe that means something to you, and allow your emotions to communicate to other people too. So that's the therapist part of me, but Elyse, if you want to tag on to that, feel free.
Yeah, no, I think when it comes to trauma, especially among children and youth, it's really difficult because very few children have agency, right? Most children are dependent on someone in some way, whether that's housing, whether that's protection, whether that's food and shelter. I mean, like, they're physically dependent on others. And so I think that really hones in on the importance of having a strong support system, right? So that might be family, it might not be. It might be a teacher, it might be an extracurricular activity or a club, something like that, to support them to be able to give them an opportunity to express those emotions in a healthy way, have someone help process and everything like that. Because for an adult, if let's say a traumatic incident happens, I'll move, right? You might have the income to move, or you might have the resources to seek legal counsel or something like that, right? Like when it comes to systemic things, it's a little bit more difficult, but you also have the room and the space and capacity to explore those thoughts and feelings a little bit more because you're older and you have different perspective. So I think it's really tricky with children, but I think it really leans into or relies on the importance of support systems and diverse and unique support systems. In bringing that up, it automatically brought up Sesame Street for me. So I worked at Sesame Street, and I worked on their programming for traumatic incidents and helping children work with traumatic incidents. And so it's as simple as maybe something happens, all right, let's do belly breathing. Let's slow down for a second and do belly breathing. I wrote a storybook, Big Bird's Best Nest, in which he does visualization techniques. So something happens, he was upset, Big Bird was upset because Mr. Hooper died. Mr. Hooper was his best friend, if you know Sesame Street. And he's like, let me visualize my best nest, where I feel safe, where I feel secure, where I know I'm loved, where I know I'm cared for. So there are a lot of techniques and practices that can help kind of that socio-emotional regulation for children that might not have the agency to just like break your lease and move, right? Might not be able to change the context in where they live, but they can have at least the foundation socio-emotionally to handle situations that might not be the best. So definitely, like, I'm a big fan of Sesame, obviously, but they have a ton of resources in regards to kind of how parents, caregivers, and others can really help bolster and strengthen children as they're growing up.
And so we have another question from the audience. Thank you, folks. You can keep them coming. I know we're at time, but if we're here, you guys are interested in the conversation, let's keep it going. So it says, you talked about people realizing the difference between short-term, i.e. eating and shopping, versus long-term, i.e. goal-setting, action-oriented wellness. How do you help people who are struggling to get to a place where they can recognize the difference in the impact of short-term versus long-term wellness? Great question. Thank you for that question.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I should direct that. I'll have Elyse. How about we have Elyse start this one, and then we'll end. We'll have Jordan answer this one.
Yeah. So in terms of short-term and long-term, I think it's really an in-depth assessment. It's like, okay, so you bought that sweater. What did that do for you? Or let's say you slept with that person. What did that do for you long-term, right? It's like maybe you got a boost of confidence, or you felt cared for or loved for a moment or two, you know, something like that. Or like, okay, like I'm hot in my new sweater, like it's all great, but like, how does that make you feel internally as a person and at the base of your personhood? A lot of those short-term fix, whether it's alcohol, sex, shopping, or any kind of other like addiction type of thing, you get instant gratification, right? And so I think it's assessing, like, is this an instant gratification, or is this something that's long-term and sustainable, right? So when I know in the question, I believe you mentioned goals, right? So like a SMART goal, you know, like SMART, like that we're like so indoctrinated to know. Well, you don't have to have those written down on a piece of paper. Kind of, you can maybe like use that as a framework. You're like, okay, so if I call Caroline right now, is this really gonna help me achieve my goal of being the best version of myself? Or is it just a crutch? Is this just gonna like make me feel better for like an hour, and then I'll be upset again and need to call Caroline again to like get me that boost, you know? So I think that's an interesting way of going about it. But I'm curious from a clinical perspective, what you would say. That's just a me perspective.
No, I think you hit on it. And I was just going to say, probably, you know, just to kind of reiterate your point, is that looking at your outcomes. And so like an example I can give is that when we talk about racial trauma, there's a time component to it, right? So sometimes when we deal with racial stressors, so let's say we're watching a video constantly of someone who looks like us being murdered. What tools do you need in that moment to really get you to a place where you're able to, one, live, because that could very well be a thing, but also when you're able to really continue on with your day. So sometimes numbing, I don't want to place numbing as always a bad thing, because like, for example, if I deal with a racial stressor at school and I got to go to class in 5 minutes, I'm going to have to numb myself to get through the class. And then I can proactively engage in strategies that are going to help me. So there's a time piece to it, but over time, if we're recognizing that we're always numbing and we're always suppressing, it gets to a place where it's not helpful. And so the outcome is that you don't feel better. The outcome is that, you know, that was helpful in the moment, kind of like Elyse said, but that wasn't helpful long-term. And so you really have to kind of identify, you know, do you need this right now? Do you need this short-term? Do you need this long-term? And figure out what the outcome is. And so sometimes it's helpful clinically to think about, you know, if you're thinking more long-term, what are your values? What do you want to see in your life? How are you manifesting that? And so if you want, you know, to have a certain type of career, but what is going to get you there versus is sleeping with everyone to get to the top, is that going to get you there? And that might not be the best example, but you get what I'm saying. So I think it's just important to really realize, like, how are your actions right now getting you to the outcome that you want? And is that going to be short-term, like immediate? Is that going to be like short or immediate, short-term, or long-term? And so that really helps people kind of understand, especially when we do racial trauma work, what do you need right now, and what do you need then, and then what are you going to need later? So I hope that's helpful, and I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to say thank you both so much. I think this is one of those conversations that I just hope it never stops. I hope we can have this conversation a million times if need be, because I think our community is in that much need of healing. So I want to thank you, Elyse, for coming. I want to thank you, Jordan, for coming. Both of you offered an amazing perspective on these topics. And thank you to all the attendees for coming. And I'm going to this is a recorded session, so we'll send this out to everyone. But yeah, and follow us, follow not us, yes us, but Jordan and Elyse on socials. I dropped their handles in the chat. And let's continue to heal as a community. Let's continue the work. So thank you, and we'll let everybody go, and we'll be back at 2:35 with our final session of the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Guys.
Bye.
Bye.